Hello, my name is Mariana Quintero.
Hello, I'm Jana.
And I'm the Emergent Future Strategic Advisor at FabLab Barcelona. My background is in media studies actually, but I became really interested in digital literacy. I come from Colombia, a country where the digital divide is absolutely huge. While in the US and in Europe you are already talking about quantum supremacy, in Colombia there are still places where we don't have electricity yet.
And I'm a designer. I studied spatial design, but I've been, since I was very little, immersed in product design. And after studying for many years, I realized that I didn't really agree with the way design functioned.
So as a young student of media, I became increasingly interested in how such a world would look like, where countries are fighting for quantum supremacy race, while others are barely jumping on board the Industrial Revolution race.
And that was the reason why I ended up in the Masters of Emergent Futures, which was it was sort of like a game changer, it was a game shifter. And during this Masters we were presented with a lot of tools and a lot of methodologies. That's the reason why I'm here today. To speak a bit about these ways of thinking and ways of doing that we got introduced during this Masters, and since then it's basically been part of my day-to-day practice.
I became increasingly interested in how open source technologies, maker movement, fab labs, distributed design and distributed digital fabrication were offering other kinds of futures, other kinds of alternatives where technology was evenly distributed, where everyone had access to innovation, where everyone could explore their own creative potentials, where the amazing richness of local nuance, ecosystems, biodiversity could really be represented in technology, and not just a future where we just consumed prepackaged technologies coming from someone really, really far away that decided that that was the way that we would understand and make a sense of the world and work and play in the world.
So it is important to talk about design for emergent futures as a starting point to designing alternative presents of today. So in order to design emergent futures, you need to think about the little things that you can do today to alternate that present that we're living, that will drive us and guide us towards that future that we imagine.
I asked, is there anybody out there that is concerned about the same things? And luckily for me, they were, and it's a huge global network, and I became part of it. And 8 years ago, I arrived at FabLab Barcelona to discover this huge world of possibilities that now I want to translate to you, even if it's just for a little while. The future nowadays, the future looks bright to me because of all the people that I've met along the way. People that are tirelessly waking up every day so that these kinds of futures can come about. And this is what we are going to talk about a bit today. I hope you enjoy it and that you become part of it as well.
In order to do this, it is really important to understand oneself and really have a introspective to your person, your practice, your values, and where you stand. And that's what we're going to do through the design space that we're going to go through later, through the weak signal exercise that we're going to go through later, and the different steps that you can do to fill up that design space into a robust and chunky tool that you can use.
Today we're going to talk about the future. But there is a problem with this sentence. Why? Because with that sentence you would have to ask, who is it that is talking about the future? Which future? And most importantly, whose future? So to rephrase this very problematic sentence, what I will say to you is that today I'm going to share a series of intentionalities that many of us in the maker movement are working towards, that are propelling a series of futures many of us would like to see come alive, guided by a series of values we consider paramount as vectors for our work and for our lives. This, of course, has to do with our history, our vision, our mission, and the values we share as a community that wants to see a world where access to technologies is open, just, distributed, and sustainable, where regenerative cycles guide our way to make our work locally meaningful, but globally scalable for whoever it might benefit, adaptable to their own rich and unique environments. So it is this revised notion of the future that brought us here today. But we will go even further, because what we really want you to consider today in this session is not how to speculate futures, abstract futures in your head, but how to enable actual alternative presence to emerge right now in the very communities that we inhabit, in our socio-technical systems we live in our cities. And no, I promise this is not a game of buzzwords. We are introducing this concept of making alternative presence because the good news is that we already have the capacity, or at least we have been formally building the capacity for the past 20 years. And we are going to show you a bit of what this means for us as makers, as designers, as craftspeople, technologists, and in general, as creatives that are striving to infrastructure a fairer, more sustainable and meaningful world for us all. So, summing up, our proposal for today is transitioning from this notion of speculating futures to actually making alternative presence. Why? Because as a distributed design network, we have been steadily working towards this vision for the past 20 years. Within the Fab Lab network and all the amazing partner organizations we have built this global community with. And even going back, if we consider the rich and fascinating history of the maker movement and open source technologies. But also because culturally, we are also transcending the notion that there is only one desirable future for us all, one desirable line of progress. Remembering, relearning, and reclaiming the vast diversity and nuance that each one of our lives, our communities, our cultures, our localities, and our ecosystems have. And this is where it gets really interesting, because building a distributed design capacity where we can be locally productive but globally connected, responding to hyperlocal challenges, considering ecological bioregions, sustainable material cycles, our human and non-human neighbors, but also sharing our key learnings and our best success stories globally, openly, so that others in very different contexts can implement the best bits of it. This is what gives us a very different sense of what our vastly diverse futures can be, ones that are really, really locally meaningful, but that can globally share the best of them. So how does this actually work? How do we even start such a process as designers, as creatives that really want to become part of this global movement, this different way of approaching design? This is a question that we have had in the Fab Lab for the past 10 years, because organically the movement has grown from very different perspectives, very different localities, very different life stories. But what we did 5 years ago is try to extrapolate from the case studies that we know, from the projects we have participated in, from the history, all the experiences that we have shared. We extrapolated from that and created a methodology that we could share with other people and invite them to be part of this way of doing, this way of making futures. And as I said, to actually embody them every day so that we can see how they become alive in our everyday practice. So this is why 5 years ago we created the Masters in Design for Emergent Futures, and we designed a step-by-step process in which we hope anyone can really start understanding what kind of futures they could grow locally, how they can position themselves in it, what local infrastructure, communities, organizations, material cycles they can include in this process. So this process consists of 3 main stages. The first one is about positioning yourself. We are in the midst of all kinds of systemic crises, but also in the very convergence of 4 highly exponential, fast-paced technologies that they say are about to change almost every system that we know, which are machine learning, deep learning models, AI, synthetic biology, digital fabrication, and distributed ledgers or blockchain technologies. How can we position ourselves in such a context where the world is crashing, but also we have this absolutely mind-melting convergence of technologies that we don't even sometimes start to understand? And this is how we created a toolkit to help hopefully almost anyone to start understanding who they are in this context, what they're interested in, how to start researching what they need to research, how to start connecting to the key allies and partners that they need to connect to make their projects happen. So how do we position ourselves in this very, very confusing world as designers, as creators? This is why we collaborated with cultural analyst José Luis de Vicente to create our very own atlas that we could offer others to go through this process of positioning themselves in this very confusing scenario. And we called it the Atlas of the Weak Signals. When we feel lost, we need maps. So this is the idea, that we needed a navigation tool to be able to understand where research is going, where innovation is going, where we want to go. So this is the first question. Where do you want to go? But maybe sometimes you lack the words. You already know the direction you want to go, but you don't exactly have the word for it. So what the Atlas consists of is this idea of weak signals, which this term coming from future forecast research, what it tries to refer to is this subtle, and sometimes not so subtle anymore, but small indications of small hints of issues, concerns, movements that can become very relevant in the near, mid or long term. We curated a set of 25 main weak signal and then an ever growing group of new concepts and trigger words that might give you these indications of where you want to take your research, where you want to move as a professional and as an individual and as a community in the present, but also in the coming years. So the first stage is we use this toolkit, which is available online, open source, which we can download, and we will demonstrate in a short bit, to create your very first design space. What is a design space? So this design space is where you will be able to see reflected all your new interests, or interests that you had but that didn't have a clear name that you can share or present to others, or that you can include in the narrative of your new projects and ideas.
In order to design for emergent futures, it's fundamental to sit with oneself. And the way we do that is through the design space. And a design space is a tool that is used, well, we use it in the Masters for Design for Emergent Futures as a situating tool. Like it allows you to understand your surroundings better. And it also allows you to generate a lot of connections with different actors and organizations and interests that you might have not intuitively seen as that they would have a direct link. It also allows us to, for example, give a narrative to this environment, no? Like allow you to understand and comprehend by projecting it on a piece of paper, or let that be an online tool or whatever, but by externalizing it and plastering it on a board per se, it really gives you that sense of that step back for you to understand the overarching interest per se, or different intersections that these may have, giving you that narrative that I was mentioning before. And of course this really helps you with what we say socialize our thinking, which in a way is to understand that we don't work in a bubble, we're not isolated. So it's really important to understand that, I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but working together, it's way easier and, in my opinion, funner to get things done and do the sort of like the right thing right thing, quote unquote, on whatever you might be working at that time. So that's a tool that Design Space may help us. It also allows us to like give you a visual understanding of this absolute cluster that might be in your mind, like a mess that might be in your mind, and it gives you this possibility to visualize it on a piece of paper, and with everything from references that you might be interested, projects that might be happening at the time that might aid you to your research or your investigation or develop your project, or simple interests that you want to fulfill and go for. Different materials, if you're interested with like working with materiality, you can have tests like prototypes and tests there that might help you again to spark that thing that you might need to fulfill the project, or to find the road to develop it further and investigate that further. We also consider a design space to be a space of opportunity for everything that I just mentioned. No, it gives you excuse the redundancy, but it gives you the space. No, it gives you a bit of breathing space to see where the opportunities might pop up. When you have everything down, you can start seeing where you might need a bit more or a bit less, or towards where you're tending to go, and that also helps you a lot for your own understanding. Again, this is used a lot as a navigational tool. It can either be, they're not exclusive, but like a positioning tool, navigational tool. The whole point of these is actually for you to trigger this ongoing reflection on your practice. So through these positioning tools and navigational tools, you're constantly reassessing your action or your standpoint, which is fundamental for today, and it gives you this criticality that it's always a point of spear towards a healthy practice, a healthy design practice. Again, of course, if you see this as a projection of you in an external source, piece of paper or whatever they may be, you're kind of like opening up yourself to be projected onto this. So it's also considered this sort of like mirror tool as a way to really see and understand what your interests may be. It's also important to mention that a design space is not a fixed thing. It's an exercise, a methodology that it's totally mutant. It changes, it shifts, it's super fluid, and should not be done, say, once in a lifetime, and then I found it and that's it. I personally, for example, myself, every X amount of months, or every time I begin a new project, or if I find myself slightly lost in a direction, I always find this exercise as a great tool to like sit with myself and, let's say, like recalibrate one's compass. So yeah, and also understand that because this exercise is full of like state-of-the-art sources and projects and theories and anything you can really find. We will go through the Atlas of Weak Signals deck later on, where serves sort of like a scaffolding of what you may do with this. But think that because of that very reason, so the nature of it kind of doesn't allow it to be static. It gives it it needs that fluidity, and it's that shifting of constantly renewing those sources and those theories and the knowledge that it contains, per se. We found that the design space has 4 key roles. These being organizational, narrative, performative, and inspirational. What we mean with these big words is that a design space, and the first point, is organizational in the sense that it allows you to get these massive volumes of information, and honestly sometimes overwhelming and very complex most of the time, and it allows you to organize it in a more clear manner, and it just gives you this clarity into some concepts that might have been, or some ideas that might have been more convoluted in your mind at the time. It's also considered to be a narrative tool, a narrative in the sense of a tool used by oneself to understand the relationships between different factors that we use within the design space. Let that be different organizations with different themes. It's just that connection, that narrative that you may follow it, like a thread that you may follow throughout. And of course, conversations that start with this design space, all of these conversations that may arise from this, it's also very interesting to follow and monitor and see how that develops as a piece. The third point being performative or participative, very in line with what we just said. It's about enabling, like allowing participation of different people, different organizations again, and also there's a very important idea of sharing, because these design spaces, you'd be surprised how important it is to make what we may refer to as a collaborative design space, and seeing where these two design spaces two different people may overlap and how you can aid each other to go forward into something that you may be interested in, which is also understanding it as a performative in the sense of it's sort of like you're giving feedback to yourself. So if you do this exercise over and over again, you're constantly reassessing and giving yourself feedback about the concerns that you may have on the table. And the last point being inspirational. I think this one's pretty straightforward. Having all of these projects and having all of this state-of-the-art and investigation that you do day to day, it brings together different things that you might not be aware of. Doing your own design space from scratch might be a bit daunting. And as we were saying before, we've got this toolkit. We've designed it sort of like a game to help you get that kickstart. We're gonna do a little show how to do clip now, so you can, with us or maybe afterwards, follow. As we were saying before, creating your own design space can be pretty daunting. So in order to facilitate that first white canvas approach, we've developed the Atlas of Weak Signals card deck, which is open source, totally available for you online, as well as a very beautifully designed physical card deck. It's sort of like a tarot deck, or like a game where you can just design to trigger thought. So we're gonna do a quick demonstration and a quick game. I've got Lina here that's gonna help me do this, and let's give it a try, see how it goes. So the first step, you've got all the instructions in here. There's 6 steps, but we're gonna just go through them with you. So the first one is to take a random, we're gonna start with random ones. So you just give it a shuffle.
I have to close my eyes, right?
Yeah.
Not look, at least.
No, totally blind. All right, so go for it. At least 2. Fantastic. Show us what you got.
Okay, the first one is kill the heteropatriarchy.
Fantastic.
And it says imagining futures that are not Western-centric.
Great.
And the other card is from the theme Design for the Anthropocene, Interspecies Collaboration.
Fantastic. Well, let's just go to step number 2, which is really just give yourself the time to discuss, see what you might understand by these different cards, right? So it's just give yourself like 10 minutes, put a timer on, so you don't spend too much time hypothesizing about it, but a good brainstorm about it. So Lina, what do you think that first kill the heteropatriarchy, imagining non-Western centric futures maybe?
Well, for me, it's about, both sides, right? From the theme and from what I can see here is getting away from the narrative that we've been following all these years, driving away a little bit from the Western optic. Perfect. And also from the norm, from cisgender, heterosexual, white people's view of stuff.
Basically the design world.
Exactly. Exactly.
Great, yeah, I mean...
What do you think about this?
I have to totally agree there. I think that this card is supposed to make us think about, put ourselves in the shoes of a different point of view. Especially in design, the view is Western-centric and not only centric, but based in that, and retro fed. So it's really important to step out and understand that we are not the center of the universe and that there's a vast amount of knowledge.
What do you think about this?
So I think every time I get this card is actually, I think that it's really important to understand the symbiosis that we as humans have with different species and different things inclusively. It's important to understand that we don't live in a vacuum and there is a constant communication between and dependence between us and different species. And of course, within species, like from the animal kingdom, for example, and the plant kingdom between themselves. And I think that this card, every time we get it, is to remember and highlight that interdependence and like fruitful relationships that might arise from understanding how these different species work.
Yeah.
What about you?
For me, it's just, as you said, a reminder that we are super, or like we as humans believe we are super isolated from everything else, and that nature doesn't work that way. And this is a reminder. So yes.
Perfect. Yep. So we're gonna pop them up in the
Board.
In a board behind, and then we'll go to step 2. Remember that we're doing this blindly, let's say, just to like spark and kickstart it. But then, if you have the deck, you can see which one affects, like which one's more relevant to you, and then you can choose them accordingly. Okay?
Then you can cheat.
Yeah.
4, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Should I?
Go for it.
Co-creation,
Okay.
environmental sensing,
Okay.
synthetic biology,
Cool.
and coding.
I mean, it's just interesting. Like, let's discuss the relationship this may have with these ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, synthetic biology.
Like,
I mean, I think it's pretty spot on,
Yeah.
no? All right, so I personally see this very related to like the maker movement, for example, and how this may be used in making through biological methods and different species, for example.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we have?
Environmental sensing,
Okay,
coding and co-creation.
okay.
This could also be related to that.
Yeah, definitely.
For me, co-creation is more about imagining futures.
Totally.
But also with the co-creation and the collaboration.
Totally. I would put it
In the-
smack in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah?
This I will.
You leave to me?
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think that this is an area of opportunity. It's more of a tool. It's understanding what you can do through coding. So it doesn't have to be directly related to the cards that you chose. Again, this is more of like an area of opportunity that you see that it might be useful. Like, for example, synthetic biology. Again, it's a field that you might find useful or not. Personally, I'm gonna leave it a bit more tangent, a bit more like orbital to the ones, just because directly to me, I don't find it extremely relevant. But again, as we were saying before, a design space is totally fluid, and through the process, you might find this extremely relevant. So don't discard anything, just leave it on a side. The idea of the random triggers is, if once you're at this stage and you still find that, you know, for example, say that all of your cards, you have the same feeling as getting the coding related and you just don't really see it matching, that's a bit what the random triggers are designed for, to give you that extra push and extra idea to see how you may be able to link these, or if this may, excuse the redundancy, trigger any thought. So then again, you're gonna draw.
How many?
A couple. Okay. All right. So we've got designing with planetary boundaries as a random trigger.
Also this.
And carbon tax. So what do you understand? What do you think about when you get these two? When you get carbon tax and planetary boundaries, designing with planetary boundaries.
Okay. Planetary boundaries can be linked directly with extractivism.
For example.
Like knowing there's a limit in resources that we are not having like thought upon, and carbon tax could be, for me, more like an initiative to regulate, to kind of
reduce them.
Reduce them, exactly. Like, for instance, if you can ride a bike you can get
you get a sale, no?
Exactly.
You get a reduction of taxes instead of using your car.
exactly
Right.
that kind of thing could be a trigger there.
Yeah, great.
And
That
this
sounds
could
good.
go both of them, kind of also in the interspecies.
Yeah. So there is one more step that we'll do very quickly now, but it's called challenge. So the idea of this is that from this you choose and you try and do a bit of a design challenge or a design action today with this in mind. So we're just gonna pick one. You can look at them and pick what might be more interesting.
Pick one.
I pick one. There's 5 different options. I'm gonna go for product. But the idea for this exercise again is to now in the white space around, it's to really like think about the links between these cards that might not be intuitive. So sit around and have a conversation about what these may mean. Again, you don't have to be right. You might understand something with this card that is not directly the definition, or it's not directly the intended definition that was done by the designers of the game, but the idea is the triggers that this has within you, per se. So I'm just going to put this up and we're going to leave it in the background for a bit while we go to the next stage, which feeds into this whole process again and feeds into this exercise for the next steps.
With this toolkit, we create our very first design space, and from that, where do we go next? So, second stage. If weak signals remain only keywords, global keywords that might be indicating global movements, interests, resonances across different groups of people or organizations, weak signals need to become rooted in the very ecosystems, contexts, communities, and infrastructures that we have at hand to work with. So the second stage is to bring those weak signals down to what we call our first person perspectives. So how do we do that? How do we bring those weak signals to the place where we live, to the issues that we are concerned with, to the communities and the possibilities that we have locally in our context? So we have different exercises that we can encourage you to do, which consist mainly of mapping, which is a key essential process that we all have to go through to understand. If we really want to work hyperlocally, we need to understand who our neighbors are. So we need to understand what spaces do we have in our city. We need to understand the communities that are already working on the weak signals or the topics of concern that we also want to tackle. We need to understand the material flows. What materials do I have in my city? What waste materials are being underutilized? What new material cycles can I create? We have so many amazing case studies and projects at Fabla Barcelona of how this process can be done. But it has to do with knocking on doors, with giving yourself the chance to really understand where you are at, create those connections to move forward. This is the first, I would say, fundamental grounding of any work that you want to do with emergent futures. Because with emergent futures, you no longer design alone in a studio, enclosed and protected by 4 walls, until you come out with a shiny new product that everyone will be in love with. Design is no longer about that, about designing something enclosed within 4 walls, just to come at the end of the process to the outside world with a beautifully finished product that no one knows how it came to be, that no one knows the material cycles that it used to take shape, that no one knows what kind of collateral damage it might be causing. So the first rule for ethical emergent futures to arise is to really co-design whatever you're designing with the people that are able to inform your process with fairer supply chains, with meaningful contributions of how this can really tackle the needs, the dreams, the concerns, and the local characteristics of communities or ecosystems, built environments, or all the different contexts in which you can design. But without this process, it would be very difficult to achieve this goal.
All right, so we've done our first exercise, our first weak signals introduction. This, as I've said multiple times before, it's a helpful tool to tackle the white canvas problem that some of us may have. It is important to also keep filling this up. This is weak signals that personal to us. I think that the exercise we showed was a random trigger, random pick card, but you can also sit and do this exercise from a personal interest and a personal matter. So in this board, we're gonna start adding other important factors. Let that be concepts that you're interested in, theories that you're interested in, academic or not. You might want to keep adding into here reference projects that are currently happening or that have happened recently, or maybe, keep it updated. People surrounding you, people that inspire you, people that work in the field or the fields you might want to dabble in. It's also important to understand the resources that you have as a person and as an individual, and the extended workspaces that you have available as a designer. Also be conscious of these and map them into the board that you're working in, into your design space, the technologies you may have available to you, the different methodologies that maybe your background has taught you that might be useful for the upcoming processes. Don't forget, it's very important not to forget what you know, what you've done, what you've studied, even though you might want to change the direction of your practice. The whole point of this understanding and mapping is to also plot in the distinct design actions. We will talk about these later, but the interventions that you go, it's also important for you, I'm just going to mention it now, for you to start plotting them as well in the design space. And there's a very interesting point of the design space, which I personally find extremely important, which is the scalability of it. You need to understand that dealing with very broad topics, you're dealing with themes that are overwhelmingly difficult to tackle, or are, as an individual, might be very complex and very overwhelming to deal with. So it's important to be able to scale this problem down or scale this concern down, and trying to avoid to use the word problem. But so you just start from yourself and understand how the onion might, or the waves might expand until a larger scale. So you have yourself, you have me, then you have your domestic surroundings and what they may bring to the table. You also have, in the sense of the city, you have your neighborhood, then you have your city, and then you can go more like the national aspect, the international, and then the global. And that would be different prisms where you can look at the design space from. Okay, so it is very important to understand that designing for emergent futures is not about the latest tech and the avant-garde futuristic thinking of what almost like a science fiction projection, like a real life science fiction projection would be. That is not what we're here for. Designing for emergent futures is designing for what you want the future to be, which is, at the end of the day, it is imagining alternative presents and how these may be achieved. And I personally like to talk about emergent futures through the terminology of alternative presents. So how you want that future to be, you can actually have action today through creating alternative presents. And this is a very important concept to have in the back of your mind while you're doing the design space, for example, because at the end of the day, we're here watching this video, doing this class, because there is something about how things are done that we might not be in total accordance with, and we want some change. We want to create an action. We want to do something about it.
So after we have positioned ourselves, after we have understood where we are standing and what possibilities we have at hand for co-designing with others, there comes stage 3, which is actually making it happen. So this is where the good news comes as an aid, because with these new distributed digital fabrication capacities, prototyping has become closer than ever. And we in stage 3, that's the idea. We will use prototyping as a research method. This always co-designing with others. How do we do that? So there is this other concept that we want to introduce to you today, which is the concept of a design intervention. We are used to designing products, to designing services, to designing systems, but this notion of the design intervention allows us to be more flexible, to allow something that we don't know yet what it is to emerge. Previously, design has been somehow a occult process with very specific stages in which at the end some products come to the market, but people usually don't know or have not participated in the whole process of it. What we are trying to change in the master is this concept of designing with a finished result in mind. When you work with open design process, when processes that include the participation of others, human and non-human, now you are less sure of what the outcome might be. And this is what it's called emergent futures, actually. These emergent futures that we are not sure yet of what they are, but we are combining all the key elements that will produce something meaningful. We are combining our values with weak signals that show us opportunities for design, with systemic mapping that can allow us to understand and to include more mindfully supply chain flows, materials, creativity, different knowledges, cultures, infrastructures that are more meaningful for the place that you are located in. So working in this way, we develop a different kind of notion of design prototyping. And we have called this working with design interventions. What is a design intervention? We define it as a design action developed with others in context. This is what will allow you to research your ideas further, to enable space for collaboration to happen, and for testing early to see if this is meaningful for the people that are designing this with you, if this makes sense for the place that you are in, if this is contemplating all of the elements that it should contemplate before committing to a full process where all of these issues are not going to be regarded. I will give you a few, to make things clearer, I will give you a few examples of what a design intervention can be. So let's look at them. Okay, so let's look at these definitions. As I said, a design intervention can be a design action developed with others in context, an opportunity to co-create and iterate prototypes with others, an experience that transforms yourself and others, an action to build trust, a group activity to bring difficult topics to the table, an experience to learn with and from others, an experience to learn from situated action, and an experience to understand your direction through embodied action.
So this would lead us straight to our next point, which would be design action. So once you've had your design space all plotted and located, and you have your references, you have your resources, you have your own projects, you have your actions, all within a board, and you can start like projecting and seeing yourself from the outside. That's when you can start doing the links and seeing how you can start designing these interventions to this action that you want to achieve, right? We're just going to quickly go through what a design intervention may be. A design intervention is a design action in context. Again, super emphasis in the fact that we're not alone, we're not vacuumed out of society, of the planet, of our surroundings. It is very important to understand the context that we're in and design for it and with it. Design intervention is also an opportunity, again, to co-create. I can't emphasize enough the importance of collaboration and co-creation for these futures that we want to achieve. Because one of the main problems still today is that there has been a little collaboration in the design world, and there has been a design for specific sectors in mind and not others. So we want to, well, I personally want to avoid this in my practice, so this is something I'm going to emphasize throughout. Another design intervention is very important to iterate prototypes. For example, like a design intervention doesn't need to be a finalized shiny product. It doesn't have to be a finalized shiny action. It's about iteration and prototyping and not staying in your bubble of, not staying in your head too much. It's very important to think, but it's also important to take action so that you can very early on in the process make any tweaks and reorientate and fix whatever that is that you want to achieve. A design intervention can also be an exercise to build trust. If you're collaborating and co-creating, trust is a fundamental pillar in this symbiosis of relationships. It's important to foster that and to take that into account, as well as with care. Very important to have those as drivers. It could also be as simple as having a conversation and having a group activity to bring difficult topics to the table, and that's a design intervention or a design action. It gives the space to talk. It gives the space to be there for others, if that's what that may be. Directly from that, it can be an experience to learn with and from others as well. It can also be an experience to learn through a situated action. So because of a certain experience or activity that you fulfill, you can learn from that, and that may be considered a design intervention. So we just went through what a design intervention may be, and may not. But we are very keen in the masters and with this methodology of something we call first-person perspective. So it's this idea of prototyping from a first person, not trying to impose any ideas on a second or third party, and it's really about embodying that you're designing and understanding that from a first person perspective and how that may aid the design of it, because you're experiencing it yourself. You can more quickly understand what may be the flaws and what may not. And also, for example, if you're designing for let's say, for example, for someone with a specific disability, and you can somehow experience what it is to live with that disability for a certain period of time, it will help you very much to design something that's relevant and accurate and useful, really, for whatever that is that you're trying to achieve at the end. So it's really about embodying that you're standing next to. So if you stand, the values that you stand for, the ideas that you stand for, the projects that are yours that you stand for, it's really about embodying them and standing next to them in a manner that you're comfortable with. It's about living with your own ideas, as Oscar Tomiko may say. And it's important to say that this prototyping and this action and this design action doesn't have to be a high-tech prototyping. It's all about doing it with what you have. It's doing it with what is around you, with who is around you, understanding what resources you have at hand and what you can do with that, and with the people that might aid in the helping. The whole umbrella of this, the whole entirety of it, it's what we would like to call the alternative presence, right? So it's understanding that designing for the future is really just designing for what you would like that future to be through the actions of today. So creating those alternative presents today will guide you to that future that you're trying to achieve.